Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. So today I'm going to talk, well, tangentially, about the new Miss Marvel show that has come out and really the future of the MCU. Because I started listening to the podcast being put out by Marvel about Miss Marvel and what it means to them and all this kind of stuff. And I want to do a specific video about those in particular. But this video is going to concentrate on exactly how this show itself, as it exists, is really a pattern for what you're going to see within the MCU moving forward. Now, I'm going to talk a lot about Marvel Comics and then move on to what this means for the MCU, because this is what I always do. First of all, I give you an argument because I'm trying to make sense of, at the very least, understand for me rationally and logically how these things play out and what the motivation for the people behind these creative decisions are making. And I do that by looking firstly at Marvel Comics because it is a very good microcosm for the entertainment system itself. We have great information on Marvel Comics and why they do things, and the people who work there just like to talk. And they like to talk in very free forms. And I listen to these podcasts where they talk, and so I know what they're thinking because they say it right out. Because I would say they don't really think anybody from the other side is listening to them when they go on these podcasts. Certainly not the unscripted ones. And this is definitely the case today. We can look exactly at what Marvel did with its all new, all different Marvel a number of years ago, and then compare that to what exactly they're doing with the MCU right now, because that failed all new, all different Marvel actually is what they're doing right now with the MCU. And besides that, the person who was really in control of that flagship movement at that time within Marvel Comics was Sana Amanat, and she is now one of the executive producers, which is helping produce Miss Marvel and will be most likely producing these other shows as we move forward within the MCU, which are going to start connecting with the movies. And I think the mindset of what is going to be driving the MCU is the mindset that was driving the people within Marvel Comics over the last about 10 years. I would say more about 8 years because they weren't strictly in control for those first 2 years. But anyway, there was a phrase that Sana Amanat used within these podcasts for Marvel, and I'll discuss more about that in a moment. But this phrase that she used in a number of podcasts and a number of Comic-Con panels that she was a part of was when you get into Marvel Comics, and she was talking about the female creators that were being brought into Marvel Comics, because she's all about the women of Marvel. When they get in there, they need to fake it till they make it. And no, that's not me paraphrasing anything. Those are her words that she used multiple times, that when you get in there, you fake it till you make it. And I believe this is what is going to be the driving mantra, as it were, for the MCU moving forward, especially if we look at Miss Marvel and its reception as it came out. So let's talk about that just for a moment to understand where this whole thing is coming from. Miss Marvel was one of those characters that came out of the all new, all different Marvel, along with other characters that you have either now seen within the MCU or will see within the near future. They would be Miss Marvel, America Chavez, and now Riri Williams, which is going to be the replacement for Iron Man. Oh, I suppose you could throw in Jane Foster Thor at the same time, and Sam Wilson's so-called Captain America. But if we look at Miss Marvel itself, the new show that has just come out, I think there's only 3 episodes out right now, and its reception and how it was promoted and the numbers of people watching it, we can see that it fell fairly flat. Now, the people who watch it seem to like it a lot, if we can trust Rotten Tomatoes at all, and I'm not looking at the critic scores, we'll discuss that maybe a little bit later, but the people who are actually watching it, the user reviews, are hovering around 83%. That's not too bad. But the point being that the number 1 show for Miss Marvel has the lowest numbers by far of any Marvel show ever. And I'll flash something up on the screen to show you that. But if you take as an indicator how many people have watched Marvel shows in the past, you will see that the second to lowest show has twice the number of viewers than Miss Marvel had for its number 1 episode. So Miss Marvel, as the number 1 episode for the show, didn't even make half of the viewership of what the next lowest show was next to it for the Marvel MCU. And the thing being that a lot of people are talking about how this is a flop, and Marvel itself is trying to say, well, it's very, very well received by the people it is intended for, the sculpted audience that it is intended for. Well, that's great and all, but that sculpted audience that they intended for is extremely small. But as I said, a lot of people are looking at the numbers and going, this is a flop. Obviously, it's going to get canceled, just like the Miss Marvel comics that keep on getting canceled and have kept on getting canceled in Marvel Comics year after year. But I'm here to say, no, it's not. I'm certain it's going to get, at the very least, 3 seasons. They'll probably push it into about 5. But even if it does get canceled, they will simply reboot it. They will simply take that character and move it into a higher venue, like the movies, and they will continue to push this character. Why? Well, because if we look back at Marvel Comics, this is the exact same thing that they were doing with Miss Marvel. Now, why are they pushing this character so much? Well, I would call this character of Miss Marvel, Kamala Khan, as the great brown hope of Marvel Comics and Marvel Entertainment. What these people were trying to do for the last 10 years and are still trying to do is to make Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers, the head of Marvel Comics, the figurehead of the entire line. They have not successfully been able to do so because of the pathetic sales and cancellation of that title over and over again, but they wanted to make her the figurehead. Why? Because this character was, from her inception, a feminist icon. However, this feminist icon was only supposed to be used as an interim figurehead for Marvel Comics. They stated at Marvel Comics in a number of podcasts when the Captain Marvel movie was coming out that her history was, to some extent, problematic. Problematic not only because of some of the stories that she was in, but also because she was a supposed feminist icon which was created by men and written by men. That just won't do. It is my assertion, and I do have some basis for this, and I've gone over it in a couple of videos, is that they were going to slowly, after they asserted that Captain Marvel was the figurehead for Marvel Comics, they were going to take her and then replace her with Miss Marvel, which again is their great brown hope of making this intersectional feminist icon girl, who's also Muslim, brown skin, the daughter of immigrants, etc., into the figurehead for Marvel Comics. And I believe that what you see right now within this show is exactly part of that agenda. And they know full well that the character doesn't sell well and doesn't produce a whole lot of money through merchandise and everything else, but they never cared when it was in Marvel Comics, and they're not going to care here. They're going to push that character until they get what they want. So it's going to be here for quite a while. Now, we'll go over this phrase, fake it till you make it, and where its origins come from within the mentality of these people, and see why exactly it is applied to this series and this character and these group of characters from the all new, all different Marvel, and why you're going to see them in the MCU moving forward, whether you like it or not. Because they're going to take the characters and use them in the exact same way that these women worked at Marvel Comics and work within the MCU, and then apply that to the creation of the story, and they're going to say, fake it till you make it. So I'm going to reference a lot of my older videos as supporting evidence for what I'm about to say. I will put, as much as possible, the links in the description for each of these videos, and within each of those videos are links to the original articles or podcasts that I'm talking about, where these people have said the things that I'm going to use as evidence for what I'm saying. There's really only 4 people that we have to concentrate on and what they say as the, I would say, main creators of the all new, all different Marvel. If not creators, then at the very least sculptors of what came out of this. They would be Sana Amanat, Kelly Sue DeConnick, G. Willow Wilson, and Stephen Wacker. Kelly Sue DeConnick, as I have just mentioned, being the one who created the modern iteration of Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel, which is the person to lead up to Miss Marvel. Then you have Sana Amanat, G. Willow Wilson, and Stephen Wacker, who are the people who created Miss Marvel. Stephen Wacker being one of the higher-ups at Marvel at that time. And he went to Sana Amanat and said, we're going to create a character based on you, and we're going to give it to G. Willow Wilson so she'll write it. And by the way, Stephen Wacker is, I'd say, what you would call a male feminist. So, something that I should go over with speed, because a lot of you have probably already heard this. Who is Sana Amanat? Well, I will link 2 videos, older videos of mine, in the description to go over exactly who she is. She is basically someone who is hired because of her political and her Hollywood connections, because through her family, she had a brother who was at that time a producer of a lot of the large movies that were going out of Hollywood. He has since been sent to prison, by the way. And her family also has intimate connections with the White House, or at the very least the White House at that time. And that is through one of their family members, which would be Huma Abedin, who is basically the right-hand man of the Clintons and the Clinton Foundation. So she was hired not because she had any experience, really. She had only, I think, 3 years experience at a small indie company, which she went to straight out of university. She didn't do anything creative there. Really, we don't know even what she did. There's no description of it. She got that job there because her brother's friend ran the company. And when that company folded and decided to move to India, she decided that she was no longer going to do anything with comics. She was going to pursue her dream, becoming a reporter. And what happened was Joe Quesada showed up on her doorstep saying, I want you to control Marvel Comics. I want you to come and work for us and change literally our entire fan base and the entire way the comics are made. Now, again, go back to those old videos of mine and you'll see that I'm not making any of this up. These are words straight from her mouth, and this is what she claims is how she got into Marvel Comics to begin with. And she started off as an editor and then moved up to partly being a creator, in so much as she became the basis, working with G. Willow Wilson to create Miss Marvel, and then very quickly moved up the ranks to become the vice president of content and character development, which is the second in control of Marvel Comics and really the person in operational control of Marvel Comics. And the fun thing being that as she was going through this process, she began to create a Women of Marvel panel that started at the Comic-Cons and then moved from there into podcast form, which she created. She was the co-host for, and she would be there always on these podcasts talking about the internal workings of Marvel Comics, what she was doing, and what the rest of Marvel Comics was doing, as she literally became the person in control of Marvel Comics. So I listened to these podcasts and so learned exactly what these people were doing, exactly what these people were thinking, and how they were laying out these plans. Because they really didn't think that anyone except for people on their side would listen to these podcasts. And so they talked extremely freely, not hiding anything about what they were doing. Now, within these podcasts itself is where we get Sana Amanat, again, the person in operational control of Marvel Comics at that time, talking to other creative people who she helped bring on into Marvel, all women, and discussing how you worked in a way that was fake it till you make it. And everyone agreed with her. Now, at the same time, they would say, right after fake it till you make it, but you deserve to be here. Now, how do those two things fit together at all? Well, in order to get into that, I have to back up a little bit into the mentality behind fake it till you make it, which again, they discussed within these podcasts and other interviews that I'm going to, once again, link in the description from my old videos. Oh, I should also say that within those podcasts of saying fake it till you make it, but you deserve to be here, the reason why they understood that they were there to begin with was because, and I quote, men held the door open for them to get into these positions. And some of you are probably saying, wait a second, you're saying these people are feminists? Aren't they the ones who say, I don't need no man, I can do this all myself? And yet these people who are supposed rampant feminists are saying, I need a man to open the door for me and let me in? Well, let me explain. First off, where does this idea of fake it till you make it comes from? Well, it comes from the idea that comics themselves, in the comic shops and in the creation of them, were gatekept by men since, at the very least, the 1950s or the 1960s. This is their feminist claim that they make over and over again within these interviews. There was an interview that Kelly Sue DeConnick very specifically talks about this, where she did an interview for ESPN. Why would the creator of comic books be talking to ESPN and doing an interview? Well, because, of course, Disney owns both of these companies. and likes to switch these things up and mix them together, even though they make no sense. So in this interview that Kelly Sue DeConnick was doing, which I did a video about, which I'll link in the description, and that will link the original one to where it came from, she talks about this idea of gatekeeping. And again, this woman worked intimately with both G. Willow Wilson and Sana Amanat and Scott Wacker and helped shape Marvel as it now exists. She talks about this gatekeeping, but most people, when they think about this idea of gatekeeping, they picture in their mind something like a bouncer standing outside the comic shop saying, "No, you women can't come in," or the guy behind the counter saying, "You're a girl, leave, only boys can come in here." That's not what they're talking about when they're talking about gatekeeping. What they're talking about is basically the idea of microaggressions. Now, what are microaggressions for a woman in a comic shop? Well, she gives some examples. Those examples would be things like the lighting in the comic shop not being very good. That is a microaggression for a girl or a woman. Or let's say the place was dirty and dingy. I know certainly a lot of comic shops that are in a hole in the wall. This would be a microaggression to these women to keep them away from buying comics. Or if, let's say, the people in the comic shop, the guys in the comic shop are not used to dealing with girls for some reason, I don't know why, but because they're not used to dealing with girls or being around girls, they just look at this girl in the comic shop, they side-eye her, they wonder what she's doing here. That is a microaggression, which Kelly Sue DeConnick and the rest of these people would claim that would keep and have kept women out of buying comics. And they believe this exact same thing applies to the making of comics itself, that women were kept out. One of the interviews that I covered, link I'll put in the description, was Sana Amanat on that Women of Marvel podcast, interviewing Ann Nocenti, who was a female writer for Marvel in the 90s, wrote some incredible stories if you ask me. And Ann Nocenti was talking about how she had to become part of this boys club, and she had to conform to the mentality of, yes, all these comics, they're superhero comics, they're going to come down to a conflict. She admits that she didn't understand exactly this mentality, and she had to get into this mentality in order to write really good comics. Instead of just, as she describes, trying to write reflexively. And Sana Amanat, in that interview, she nodded her head, said yes, and then said but, and then would contradict everything that Ann Nocenti said. Because she would say to Ann Nocenti, no, that's not the way that comics are made anymore. And basically patted her on the head in a verbal way, saying, I'm so sorry for you that you had to go through that, because they would see that as gatekeeping itself. So if you want to boil it down, where does this gatekeeping come from and what does it mean? Well, it comes from really systems of merit. But if you are talking to a feminist, one of these women on these podcasts, where would they say it came from? Well, they would say it comes from the patriarchy. Quite literally, I just covered an interview on the Women of Marvel podcast with a woman called Nick Stone. She's writing some of the YA novels for, I think it's Shuri, that are going to be coming out and have been coming out for the last little while. And she was basically asked that exact question, and that was her exact answer. It's the patriarchy. And again, trying to cut down on time here, not to go too long. Where does this patriarchy come from? I did another video a long time ago about the fact that this mentality, this feminist mentality, is coming from a quote-unquote progressive ideology where they believe that women are saints and men are evil. And this is why they talk constantly about power. Honestly, when I covered one of these podcasts, it was, I think, about a 45-minute podcast, and I counted the amount of times they said the word power or the equivalent of the word power, and they said it at least once every 30 seconds. They concentrate on power all the time because their quote-unquote progressive ideology can be boiled down to accumulation of power. But when they were talking about this within that specific podcast, they noted the difference between female power and male power. To them, when you use the word power itself, you're talking about male power. And that is something that they would denote as being competitive, destructive, and, in the end, evil. Whereas if you have female power, they call that empowerment, and that is characterized by cooperation, creation, and goodness. This, in its modern context, comes from, as I did a video about it a long time ago, this movement, this feminist movement from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and a little bit into the 90s, where these feminists quite literally created false information or massaged real information to feed to the court system within the US in order to paint women as being saints and men as being devils. And since it's been in effect for about 30 years now, they just come out and say it. There's actual books published by these feminists now where they declare, yeah, all of this was just lies. We did it, and we did it for the empowerment of women, and we make no bones about the fact that we made up this information because it now controls the court systems, and that's what everybody thinks. But anyways, the point being that they create this dynamic to support their ideological stance of feminism, that men are devils and women are the saints of humanity. Now, men as devils have part of their destructive power competition. Therefore, competition has created the patriarchy, which then oppresses women, which then sets up the gatekeepers, which then doesn't allow women into these positions where they control things like the making of the stories that everyone consumes, i.e. within comics, movies, and television. So, to answer the original question, why do women have to, first of all, have men open the door to let them in? Well, because the patriarchy still controls these industries. And so, these women have to worm their way in, as it were, and do so by the male feminists opening the doors for them and letting them in. And when they let them in, then they're going to change the system so that it belongs to them. It's kind of like, well, I'd use the analogy of a woman who is going to marry a guy that she knows is not good for her and she knows is not a good person, but she does it anyways thinking, yeah, I'm going to change him and make him into what he really should be. This is the mindset of these women coming into the industries, the entertainment industries, something like Marvel Comics. They're looking at it saying, yeah, it's part of the patriarchy, but when I get in there and I get power, I'm going to change it into what it should be. Oh, and by the way, the male feminists should open this door and allow them in because they should be ashamed of what males have done to keep women out of these positions, and so they should make some amends by opening this door and allowing the women to come in. Now, what does this look like? Do I have any evidence for this? Well, yes. First of all, as I said, in that podcast that I'm referencing, the main one, the Women of Marvel podcast, they talk specifically about how men had to open the door for them and allow them to come in. And what does this look like? Well, one of the people in that podcast, one of the writers, said it looked like for her the fact that Marvel Comics went and found her and offered her this job to write for Marvel Comics because she won an important storytelling award. But as she then goes on to describe, this award basically had people submit stories en masse. Then they whittled it down to 4 and found the most deserving person of those 4 in order to give the prize to. But as she describes, those positions, those last 4 positions of the best stories, 2 of them had to be women. And she goes on to discuss the fact that if that stipulation had not been there, she would probably not have been among the top 4, therefore not have won the prize, therefore not been approached by Marvel to come and work and be a writer for Marvel Comics. The other one being these Women of Marvel podcasts themselves. They had a theme for every year, and they put out a lot of podcasts per year. One of their themes for one of their years was how women should build up alliances and allies throughout the industry so that they can each help each other in order to move up the ladder of the creative system and the production system of these pieces of entertainment. Now you'll see, it's just a system of nepotism that they're talking about, not a system of merit. It's, you get into a high position, you help me out, then when I get into a high position and you need help from me, I will help you. This is what they concentrated on for an entire year's worth of podcasts. So they believe that you have to fake it till you make it, partly because this system, the entertainment system, whether it be comics or movies or television, still is in the grip of the patriarchy, and so they still need to worm their way in there. And at the same time, they believe they deserve to be there, A, because it's their time now as women to fulfill these positions because they were unjustly kept out of those positions for so long, while, again, at the same time, you would think that fake it till you make it means that they're going to fake it until they learn this position and figure out how it actually works and then do the job correctly. No, I'm sorry, that's not how it works. Again, as that woman who marries a guy who she thinks she's going to change because he's now a nasty person and she wants to make him into something better, which is to say, make him into what she wants, this is exactly what they do within these positions. It's not that they get in there and they start to fake it and then eventually learn how to work within these positions and do them correctly. It's at the same time as they fake it, they start to change the positions and how they work to accommodate their feminist ideological underpinnings of no competition, and therefore I don't have to actually learn these things, these merit-based system things that were originally in place for this position, because I've now changed the position in order to fit me instead of me changing to fit it. And to support that point, I would refer once again back to the statement that Joe Quesada made to Sana Amanat when he hired her, saying, I want you to change the entire way that comics are made. Part of that changing of the entire way the comics were made was not to look at how they were made previously, but to start from scratch. And again, number one, this is not just the way that they get into these positions and treat these positions, but then that entire mindset bleeds into the creation of these stories which they are producing as their product. Now, let's take all of that mindset from Marvel Comics and apply it to the MCU. And can we do that? Well, yes, we can. Why? Well, here's why. First off, one of the producers of this show is Sana Amanat. She is back at her low-level position in a bigger pond right now. And this low-level position is a junior executive producer of Ms. Marvel. But the thing is that she is now working under another woman who is basically the, grown-up version of what she wishes to become. And that woman, who is the person who is now in control of the MCU, is Victoria Alonso. Victoria Alonso is the picture of everything that I have just described. Now, again, I've listened to many interviews and read many interviews with this woman, and I will give you just one, really an exemplar statement that she made to show you that she has this exact mentality. She had said in one of the interviews that she did about a year ago, I think it was, that whenever she's called into a boardroom meeting, one that she's never been to before, when she goes through that door, and all the people are sitting at the table waiting for her because she's the bigwig, what she does, the very first thing that she does is she counts heads. This is what she said. And why does she count heads? Well, she wants to figure out just how many women are in the room as compared to men. And she goes on to state that when she sees that there aren't as many women or more women than men sitting at that boardroom table, what she thinks is, well, I know my work is cut out for me here. And what does she mean by that? Well, she means that her number one job is to readjust that boardroom before they have even anything to say so that women either are equal to or outstrip the men. And that's what she will do when she goes through the process of working with these people. She's going to weed out the men and she's going to bring in women. And by the way, it's not going to stop there either. She's very much an intersectional feminist. She herself, besides being a woman, she is a so-called person of color. She is also a daughter of immigrants. She's also someone who is part of the alphabet community, etc., etc. So once you get all of those women in there, then you're going to have to switch them out for other underrepresented classes, or at the very least, make sure they're intersectional women of one kind or another. So it's never going to stop. But my point being, this is, in one statement that she made in this interview, the exact same mentality as they had in Marvel Comics under Sana Amanat. It's the fact that women should be more than men at this boardroom table. I don't care what people did to get here. We need to change it because, of course, it would go back to the ideas of the patriarchy and oppressive men and how men are destructive and use their power in destructive ways, and women are more creative and they're the saintly ones, so they need to be brought in. And this, again, is the destruction of any kind of merit system. And of course it needs to be, because a merit system is based upon competition. And competition, as I have said, and as I covered in that older video, competition is part of that male destructive power. You have to get rid of it, and you have to move on to a system of cooperation, so-called, where you make alliances and allies in order to institute a system of what I would call nepotism, so that they can help each other control everything that's going on within their sphere and bring in more people to do just that exact thing for them. And of course, this bleeds into the way that they're making these stories as well. Which brings us back to the MCU and the fact that you have this show, Ms. Marvel, which is not doing very well. But they keep on pushing it. They keep on using non-merit-based system things in order to promote it and prop it up. Now, I did an entire video about the fact that for Marvel Comics, and really I think the MCU moving forward, certainly Marvel Comics anyways, over the last 10 years, they have switched out their criteria of how something is actually doing well. It no longer is money, it is awards and how well they can push this thing out into the world. Again, let's go back to one of those Comic-Con panels, the Women of Marvel panels that Sana Amanat was at, and I covered, and I'll put the link in the description for it, where she was asked directly if this woke ideology was destroying comics because they're no longer selling well. Her direct answer to that question was, no, you can't just look at the numbers, because we got this character out there. That's important, and since we got that character out there, we can then take that character and put them into larger and larger venues, which is exactly what we're going to do with this character we're discussing, and the character they were discussing at that time was America Chavez, who you've just seen in a major MCU movie with the Multiverse of Madness. This was their entire plan from the very beginning. They had a character, which they knew was a dud, which they could not keep in its own title because they kept on failing. And even when they put her in a title where she was the lead, but there was an ensemble cast, they couldn't even keep that going either. It kept on failing, but they kept on pushing this character anyways. Out of the mouth of Sana Amanat, they did that for a very specific reason, because they were just using these failures as stepping stones to put this character into a larger and larger venue, and their eventual end goal was to get them into the MCU, which is now what you see, and they're not going to stop that process now they are here. By the way, the non-competitive way that they promote these books and these movies and classify them as a success was the very first thing they did with Ms. Marvel. When, even before the first episode came out, they had the reviewers for Rotten Tomatoes review it, and it got, I think it was somewhere between a 96 and a 98% critics review, and they used that in order to promote this show. And of course, it got a 98% by reviewers because it's so intersectional that if any one of these reviewers started to malign this show, they would just call them an hysterophobe of one thing or another and then destroy them. Therefore, they were all just protecting their own backs by saying, yes, this is a good show. I'm sure some of them thought it was a good show, but I'm sure a lot more of them went, I'm going to have to give it a good rating or else I'm going to be in trouble. This is the non-merit system award which they were given, and this is how they're going to continue to push this character and characters like it. So again, the whole fact that its viewership is in the toilet, especially if you compare it to other Marvel shows, this doesn't matter. It doesn't matter one whit. They're going to continue to use the mentality of fake it till you make it, which is to say, they're going to fake that this character and this show or this movie that she's going to be in the near future, they're going to fake the fact that, yeah, sure, everyone likes this in their hopes that they're going to change the system enough so that it becomes something that people, at the very least, are going to gravitate towards because she's a part of popular culture, not because she's an actual character or in actual good stories. And this is going to be the entire future of the MCU moving forward, just simply propped up every once in a while by a major character holding the entire franchise on their shoulders as they try to hold the door open for a woman to take their place, just like we're going to see in Thor: Love and Thunder. So the question that some of you may be asking is, why am I, who have my channel, which is centered around the concept of hero, why am I talking about all of this? Why? Because as I've gone over in a number of my videos, the system and idea of being a hero, the old system that is what permeates the idea of hero throughout Western civilization, and really, I would say all of human civilization, is the idea of a hero being a paragon of virtue. And that system of virtue is a system of merit. And so if they destroy systems of merit in order to take over the controlling elements of how to produce these forms of entertainment, and then that starts to bleed into these stories, which we've seen for a number of years now, it's going to destroy any real notion of what a hero actually is. And besides that, I want to answer the question, is there any silver lining to this? I would say yes, indeed. And the great thing being, of course, is that as these people in the normal corporate media sectors are continually lowering the bar of excellence so that these people who don't belong there, who need to have the mentality of fake it till you make it, and then rejigger the entire job that I'm doing in order to fit me instead of me fitting into it, when they do that, when they continually lower that bar, they are making it easier and easier for us who, on the other side, since we are the ones who are actually kept out of entering into these systems, these older systems of storytelling or being employed by them, what do we need to do in order to make a product? Well, we need to continually raise the bar above even where it used to be. And that's exactly what I'm trying my very hardest to do with my graphic novels. And some people who read my last graphic novel even made that exact point. They contacted me and said, "You just raised the bar." By the way, quick plug, if you're looking to get my graphic novel, Thomas Valiant, you can email me. My email is in the description of this video, and I can give you the rundown of where you can look at it and also how much it's going to cost, etc., etc. And the thing being that, I'm sorry, but if you're one of these creative people, I learned this a long time ago, especially being a conservative-minded person. I'm not going to get any help from other conservative-minded people. Why? Because most conservative-minded people are of the opinion that, yeah, if you are actually capable of working at that level, show me. You have to show me your merit. You have to prove to me. You have to compete and do it all yourself and prove to me that you deserve to be here, and then I'll give you a shot. And if you look at that process, if you look it square in the eye and say to yourself, that's the path that I'm going to take, you, my friend, are on the path to the heroic. So, if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this. All right, I'll see you later. Bye.